Hi everyone. I'm Deidre, and I am the workshop designer here at Livin Farms. And just to give you a brief introduction, what we've been working on here is a 12-part curriculum to help teach students about becoming more sustainable and about the sustainability field in general, and also how they could use our product, the Hive Explorer 2.0, as a means to learn about the different processes, natural processes that go on. So I'm going to quickly share my screen right here. All right. So what we have here is the Hive Explorer, and I'm going to be talking to you today about Livin Farms in general, and also about the Hive Explorer and about edible insects. And when we're first talking about the company, it's important to bring up the founder of our company, Katharina Unger, who grew up, or who's Austrian, and this is a photo of her growing up on a farm in Austria. And because of this background, she had quite an intimate knowledge with the food, environment, and animals. And this is kind of what led her into thinking about something that is important for all of our us, which is food. It's an important part of our daily lives. This is not the healthiest spread, but we do eat 3 times a day, every single day. And in doing so, we not only need to eat a lot of things, but that means we're also throwing away a lot as well, because I mean, it's a natural part of eating. We don't always finish everything that we eat. And with that as a given, if we're taking into account the entire world's population, which is almost 8 billion people, I took this snapshot just yesterday, and you can see that the numbers have been rising. If we remember that the world, or the Earth, the 4.8 billion years that it's been around, it's had the same amount of resources here. We can't just make things out of thin air, and we also just can't make things disappear into thin air either. So thinking about that, Katrina very quickly realized that we're going to be in a bit of a pickle. We have a huge protein shortage, but more than that, we are seeing food shortages already happening around the world. This is just one example of one type of shortage, but with animal products and animal protein in particular, there's going to be an expected demand of about double of what we have today by 2030, which is only a few years from now, 10 years from now. And at the same time, we're losing our global arable land, arable meaning the land that we can use for agriculture or for ranching. And land can be lost a lot of times from climate change or development, or even political instability. It's all tied in together, but it just means that there's less place for us to grow our food and a higher demand for this food. Right, and when we're thinking about animal protein in particular, we see that they're taking up about 1/3 of our croplands. They're also taking about 80% of our antibiotics, which to me I found very shocking, because that means we're putting so much of our effort into medicating the animals that we're eating and preventing them from getting sick, because they're not able to do that for themselves in the way that we're cultivating them right now. This photo right here is of a production plant where they're growing animals, and the waste is going right into the water. You can see that it's a bunch of really strange different colors. And so our food systems at the moment are very polluting. If we think about our favorite dish and the ingredients and where each of those come from, we realize that we're not very efficient at the way that we grow, transport, or even really eat our food. And this problem is throughout the food system. Even from picking the plants, we see that we there's just so much that's wasted. If you learn, I spent some time learning about how things like apples and fruits that we see in the supermarket, there's very strict requirements for how they look, so not even how they taste. And the ones that even just have a little bruise here, or they maybe fell on the ground, they just get thrown away, and it's a massive waste. We see also that when we're throwing away our food, the food is being mixed up with a whole lot of other different types of waste. Food waste is a type of organic waste, meaning that it can break down in the environment. But inorganic waste, things like plastics, metals, and a lot of things that we use for packaging, really, and then some, it just can't be, those compounds cannot be returned to the environment. And when we mix both organic and inorganic waste together in the landfill, as it is the case in so many different parts of the world, it it means that there's going to be methane that is produced from the breakdown of this organic matter while it's not exposed to the environment. And it's a problem because if we're thinking about greenhouse gases already, we often think about CO2, but methane is about 100 times more warming than CO2, has a greater global warming potential. And right now I'm talking a lot about doom and gloom, but I guess the point that I'm trying to make is that our food systems are very inefficient and frankly not that healthy, even for the animals that we're raising, for the plants that we're growing. They all have quite adverse side effects, at least the way that we're doing things now in order to feed our population. Okay, so that's the problem. Let's talk about solutions. I think something that helps me as I study environmental sciences, because it can be quite daunting to see that there are such large problems that need to be fixed. It has really helped to look at histories and traditional agricultural methods. Not everything is perfect. I don't think that we should automatically go back to these types of practices without taking a critical look, but in general, the relationship that people have with their food, even thinking about Katrina before on the ranch, is that people are much more involved with the food that they're eating and the food that they're making and the environment that they have to interact with on a daily basis in order to do so. We find that there's a lot of, that the relationship that we think about now with our food is very distant. Our food systems tend to be very long and very complicated and very wasteful, partly because a lot of us are raised not knowing how to grow our own food, not knowing how to raise animals, not knowing how to even like plant. For those of us who have grown up in the city, it can be very daunting to think about all these different things and not having it just ready for you at the supermarket. And so that brings me to one of the biggest allies that we tend to overlook because of their small size, because we, as a culture at the moment, tend to think of them as quite disgusting or gross. A lot of people have quite adverse effects. These are insects. And insects are particularly helpful to us every single day. We don't think about it, but a lot of times we use products made from insects. Insects are integral to how every single ecosystem works because they are such a diverse species, and in terms of mass, if we take the entire mass of mammals on this earth and compare it to the entire mass of insects, the insects outweigh us. And there's just so many of them, even though they're really, really tiny. So let's think about the honeybee, first of all, which is really important for so many different crops, not just fruits and vegetables, not really vegetables, but a lot of fruits. And in the US, about 100 different food crops rely on different species of bees in order to to grow and in order for us to get the food that we want to eat. Silkworms are really important in places like Thailand, Cambodia, Indonesia, because of the silk that comes from their cocoon. That's to help make clothes. Insects help make our clothes. And for insects like grasshoppers and crickets and mealworms, those are all really important parts of, really important sources of protein for a lot of people, especially accessible protein in places that meat is such a luxury. And you can see here is just a dish is maybe not what you would consider the most appetizing. I have to admit that I also don't always love to see insects on top of my food. But I want to talk a little bit more about the relationship of insects with food because it's more complicated than we tend to realize. And what we tend to overlook is that because there are so many insects in the world, they can range from being as large as your hand to tiny and microscopic that we don't see, is that we actually eat them every day without noticing it. They can be in our chocolates, our vegetables, our juice, and we're none the wiser. And at the same time, there's some great benefits to eating these animals. There's, whether or not we realize that we're eating them, in general, they're giving us, if we're talking about the amount of protein that we're looking at, they're comparing to any of the traditional meats like pork or chicken or beef. If we compare the same amount of protein, mealworms are always using less amounts of resources in terms of land and food, water, and carbon emissions. And this is partly because they're so tiny. They're super, super, super efficient at converting things that they eat and converting that into usable protein for whether it's for us or for our pets and for our animals. It's important to keep that in mind. So if we're talking about the kind of like gross factor of insects, I just want us to take a quick look at these. These are all foods that can be seen at the more luxurious of restaurants. The first photo is just some roasted potatoes. The second is sushi, and third is lobster. And while these are considered quite, I guess, more on the high end in terms of the food that we might see, if we look at the origins of food, we see that all three of these were not a favorite among people. They were often considered a poor man's food, quote unquote, in terms of potatoes. And even for sushi, it was considered the workers' food, the fishermen's food, because they couldn't afford to cook, so they would eat it raw. And for lobsters, they were considered the cockroaches of the ocean because for a long time, there was a very big stigma against eating anything that was at the bottom of the ocean. And so our perceptions of food tends to change. And so I want us to just be aware that what may seem gross now, it's not a stagnant thing. It's something that changes over time. And we are able to help facilitate that change. When we look at the foods that are available now and we think of these delicacies in terms of insects, there are a lot of insect delicacies out there. This photo on the right is from Thailand. I used to live there, although I didn't take this photo, but it was very common for these different types of insects. You can see there's silkworms and grasshoppers and crickets, and they're all served with a bunch of spices and actually served as snacks. They're fried, a lot of these. You can just get them in a little pouch and eat them. And they're healthier than a lot of the food that we consume that have a lot of preservatives in them. And these are the favorites of a lot of the locals, maybe not so much in these recent generations, but definitely in previous generations. And with the photo on the left, this is a photo of a caterpillar. This is of a delicacy in Hong Kong and China. This particular species of caterpillar was infected by a particular species of fungi. And they're sold for thousands of dollars on the market due to medicinal properties. And we can have a debate about, the validity of those things, but at the end of the day, these are people paying really expensive prices for these insects because of the status and the luxury of these items. But those are human perceptions. Those are not things that are intrinsic from those animals. So in terms of Livin Farms, we decided to go with our friends, our insect allies, the Tenebrio molitor. And there's a lot of benefits that come with eating these animals that I won't go through the entire thing, but in general, they can really help create more healthy diets for us. And as Katerina and her partners were working on different ways to harvest these animals, you can see there's different designs here. She actually went all over the world to talk to people. This is a tribe in Kenya, and she was speaking with the elders and learning about their own agricultural practices, and also finding out different ways to use the environment and natural processes in order to help us. This is a photo taken from Hawaii, but she also worked with universities in Malaysia, where she was allowed to test out prototypes. And as Livin Farms started to develop, the company started to develop, and our devices started to develop, it really helped that we had the assistance of some of our first customers. They really helped to give us feedback on the things that we were doing, what they liked about the device, what they didn't like so much, and we ended up coming up with a whole bunch of different things, different devices that could be used to harvest. These first two actually use the black soldier fly, which is another species of insect that can very efficiently break down food waste, and is being used on a larger scale in Indonesia in order to do that. It's something I will cover in one of the other lessons. But in general, we see that this is the final product that we came up with, the Hive Explorer 2.0. It is much smaller than the different layered ones that you saw, which is for the Hive Home. And really, as someone who has worked on outreach, I find that this is a really great product to help teach students, and even just other people in general, about insects as an ally, and also about sustainability. So if we're thinking about just Tenebrio molitor, the mealworms, they're actually a beetle, and they're not worms at all. What we're thinking of usually are the larval stages, which is right there, it's the worm. And the Hive Explorer was designed specifically for all those different stages. We designed it with things like a fan and a temperature and humidity control and a hot plate, basically because some of our biggest supporters have been teachers, and teachers obviously have a lot to do. They have a lot on their plate already, so we wanted to keep this device more self-regulating. If we're thinking about sustainability potentials in general, the mealworms can eat our food waste. Not everything, although I will talk more about that in the other lessons. They can be found everywhere in the world, and they tend to be known as grain pests. But when they eat, their poop can be used to fertilize plants. And we even, again, in one of the other lessons, we'll be showing you guys and students how to grow microgreens, which can later be eaten and mixed with things like salads and fruits, and you can see that we've kind of closed the loop on this, and we're trying to create a more sustainable livelihood for everyone. And so something that I have here, I'm gonna stop the screen sharing for 1 second. All right, So what I have here is actually one of the Hive Explorers. And in terms of a teaching tool, I really like this because of a variety of reasons. You can see here that the pupae are here, we've got the beetles here, and we've got some mealworms right here. They're eating some oats. I think one of the benefits of this in particular is just its mobility, being able to actually go from classroom to classroom with this, being able to not have it too much of a burden. I'm able to have the heating tray, which I have right here, plugged in at home, and I can bring this and separate it momentarily, and the mealworms don't get out. There's no smell, which I think is really important. I've had to raise colonies of insects in the past, and the smell is it can be off-putting to some people. And this lid is really great at maintaining that smell and also giving you a really good look at the insects that are inside. They're just happily doing their thing. But before I leave you, I just want to talk a little bit about the mealworms and just nature in general, because there's a lot of potential here for us to really reshape our food systems. And more than that, our production systems, a lot of the capitalist systems that work in terms of assuming that we have unlimited resources. That is not the case, and we're learning that now. But I just want to point out that while there are really big problems with a lot of these systems, if we look at the mealworm in general, there was just a study that showed that mealworms can eat polystyrene, which has huge potential for us, especially considering that with packaging and plastics in general, which is a huge problem, polystyrene is one of the main types of microplastics that we find in our oceans and are being consumed by a lot of the fish that we eat. And so even something as small as this, these are things that the mealworms can just do on their own. They're able to actually not just eat the styrofoam, but they're actually digesting it, like chemically breaking down the styrofoam into simpler compounds that can be returned to the environment. And that's really special. And there are just little things like this all over if we're looking hard enough in our environment that can help us come out of some troubling times that we can see ahead of us. And so as I leave today, this is actually a photo of Katarina's father, and just want to leave you with the knowledge that there are ways that we can reshape our future, and ways that we can think of making our world more sustainable if we are open to listening and learning from the environment, and also learning from each other. I think that's very important as well. Please, if you have any questions, please send them right ahead. I'll take a look at them and we'll be answering them as soon as I can. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.